MicroBrewr podcast. Here's your host, Joe Shellaroo.
Welcome to another MicroBrewr podcast. Yep, like the announcer said, I'm Joe Shellaroo. This is podcast number 4, and I'm just having so much fun doing this. If you've never listened to our podcast before, essentially what we're trying to do is provide some good information for anybody who's looking to start up a brewery, anybody who's currently running their brewery, or if you just got a passion for craft beer. Hopefully we can help fulfill that passion and give you some good information. So the first announcement for the podcast is before we were doing bi-weekly, and I've just been getting so much great feedback and so many listens to this podcast that I've decided that I'm going to commit to doing the podcast weekly now. I've got to thank Nathan Pierce. He's actually going to be on the next podcast for really pushing me to do this, and we'll get to learn more about Nathan Pierce's story and his little project that he's got coming up on the next podcast. And since we're going to weekly, another thing that you can really do, if you're getting some value from this podcast, I would love it if you could give us a rating in iTunes. So it seriously takes maybe a minute or two. If you could, just go search for MicroBrewr in iTunes under podcasts in the iTunes library, and then just give us a quick rating. What this really does is it helps us get the word out and get us up in the search results. So if you do that, I really appreciate it. So for this podcast, we've got Grant Pauly coming from Sheeps Brewery in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. So Grant had a ton of great information on quality control, bottling, starting up their distribution brewing. They've been seeing a lot of success lately. They've had multiple expansions. They won an award for the best new brewery in Wisconsin, and at the time we were talking, they were only a year and a half old. So they've got a lot of great stuff going on, and I'm not going to hold you back any longer from listening to the interview, so here it is. All right, and today we want to welcome Grant Pauly to the MicroBrewr podcast from Sheeps Brewery in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And Grant, it's great to have you on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
No, it's great to have you here. And as I was telling Grant right before, I grew up in St. Paul, so pretty close to Sheboygan, Wisconsin. But now that I'm in Kansas, I'm a little further away. So, Grant, I was wondering, for people who aren't familiar with you, if you could just start out and give us a little bit of your background and how you ended up getting into brewing.
Sure. Well, like most of the other brewmasters I've met my time at Sheeps, it seems like none of us grew up knowing that we wanted to be in the brewing industry. My path took me through concrete before I fell into Sheeps Brewing. Thankfully, though, while I was doing that, my wife, girlfriend at the time, gave me a homebrew kit for Christmas one year. And that was right when I had turned 21, and it quickly started homebrewing and fell right in love with it. Thankfully, that first batch didn't turn out terribly, I think, was really what the linchpin was there. So, yeah, I was brewing away and working concrete for my family's business, and did that for about 6 years, when finally I realized, I love the small business aspect of it, getting to be involved in a lot of different things. But for me, I really just hated concrete. Some people love it, and God bless them, because we need those folk, but I just did not quite get the joy out of it. And my wife and I started talking, and realized that I was passionate about beer, loved it, loved making it, and maybe we should consider giving that a go. Or I guess more, she gave me the green light to look at giving that a go.
So once you got the green light, I mean, there's so many places to go from that point. Where do you start after that?
Well, I started with looking at education. Brewing for as long as I had prior to this, I had a good idea of how different malts blended together, hops, the actual making of it, and creating recipes. But the technical side of trying to make sure that 6-pack tastes like that 6-pack every single time, that's something that you really don't pick up, generally speaking, brewing at home. It's kind of the old adage I've heard is, it's easy to make a good beer once, now make it again. And that's what I wanted to make sure before I looked at pursuing anything too deeply. I needed to get some training. So I signed up for coursework through the SIBO Institute in Chicago and started getting a brewing sciences background. At that time, sooner than I expected, an old brew pub in our town went out of business. And I watched the building to see what was going to happen with it and waited a while and eventually found out that the equipment was for sale. And that's kind of what started our journey into Sheeps Brewing here in Sheboygan. It worked out really well for us. I had lived in Sheboygan for 5 years prior to that and loved the town. It's a small town that lives bigger than it really is. We have some great restaurants, great people, great businesses, and I was not excited about leaving. So this was just a nice opportunity. So we chatted about it and thankfully had a bank willing to work with us, and we purchased the equipment.
So once you saw that the equipment was for sale, how did you approach the bank to get them to, I assume they gave you a loan so you could purchase the equipment?
They did, yes. I was very fortunate because at that time I was 29 years old, and where we were as an economy just a few years back, most banks weren't giving loans to 29-year-olds. But when in my family business, I did a lot of our forecasting and financials and accounting, that sort of thing. And thankfully, my numbers for the forecastings were fairly accurate for the few years prior. That when I presented them with my business plan, they were willing to assume that I at least know a little of what I was talking about and make the leap. It was a small local bank. Right now our banker is still one of our biggest cheerleaders. He comes in almost every Friday for a growler of our bad boy. And yeah, they really kind of went outside of what I think a normal bank would have done and went in on it with us. So it was great, an incredible opportunity.
That's awesome. It kind of seems like everything just fell in line right there for you.
Yeah, and what really was our building is a little bit unique. The bar, it used to be an old brew pub, of course, so it had the equipment and then a bar to go with it. And a group came in and they just wanted to run the bar. So that's who was looking to sell the equipment. So when I approached them, I purchased all the equipment and we rent space in the building. So we are just a packaging brewery that has a bar in our building owned by someone else. So, they have all our beers on tap. They sample for us, growl it for us. When people come for our tours, we send them to see them afterwards. And it really let us just focus on making beer right now, which worked out well because after brewing for 10, 12 hours a day, I really have no desire to go and tend bar. So this worked out nicely for us.
So what made you decide to focus on just distributing beer instead of going with the brew pub theme, especially since you had the bar right there?
Mainly doing concrete. At first when I got into it, I enjoyed it. It was fun challenges and, I had a kind of a passion for getting into it and growing with it, and work was fun at that point. As the years went on, I realized that passion wasn't quite there anymore. And when I looked at the brewing opportunity, I knew I was passionate about brewing and making beer, but a brew pub is so much more about than having the food and the other aspects that go with it. And that really did not excite me. And I didn't want to fall into the same trap that I was in before of having a nice opportunity, but not being excited every morning to wake up and go do what you have to do for the many hours to come. So that's where we really just wanted to focus on making beer and making sure that we put all of our effort and energy into that so that it could be the best beer we could possibly produce.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And that's one thing that I've consistently heard from multiple brewers that are starting up brew pubs is that when they're looking at that, they don't realize that they're actually starting up a restaurant with the brewery inside instead of doing a brewery that serves food with it. There's just such a commitment with the brew pub that there isn't with just distributing beer. You can focus a lot more on the beer like you were talking about.
Right. I mean, for us right now, I'd say we take about 4 to 5 months to create every recipe we do. We're constantly producing test batches and test batch after test batch with, doing minor tweaks here and there. And, until it's perfect, we're just going to do another test batch, even if it's just a really minute change. It takes a lot of focus and a lot of time and effort. So it was the right move for us. I'm glad we went this way, and let's just like I said, do what we love.
Yeah. Hey, Grant, I was wondering if you could take us on a little walkthrough through the brewery, and if you could just go, when you're talking through each of the pieces of equipment for people who aren't as familiar, just describe just in general what that thing does.
Sure. So our building it's great. It was originally a sock factory. It was it was 3 stories tall, built in the early 1900s, and they had heavy equipment on just about every spot in this building. So actually, on our 3rd floor, we keep 30,000 pounds of grain that we use a freight elevator to take up there for us. So we're very fortunate on that end, and we mill on the 3rd floor then and just gravity feed into our mash tun. So one of the kind of unique differences about that is a lot of places when you mill, you have this small little auger that pushes it from the mill, or your grist case, which is where you store the milled grain if you want to mill ahead of time, into your mash tun. And that can take up to, who knows, I've seen some breweries where it can take 25, 30 minutes to mill into the mash tun. It takes us about 7 because of just being able to gravity feed it there. So we have a nice little savings in the morning and not having to sweat and haul sacks of grain up 2 flights of stairs every day. But from there, our brewery, like a lot of brew pubs, you want to keep all the pretty equipment in plain view of the pub, and then you hide all the ugly stuff. So from the windows in the bar, you can see our fermenters as well as our brew house, which composes for us of a mash tun, combo lauter tun, as well as then a kettle, which combos as our whirlpool. So we just have a 2-vessel system right now. And the mash tun is where you convert all the starches to sugars to, which is the fuel for the yeast to make all the alcohol. And it's also where then you get all that great malt character. So it's just it's a 10-barrel system that we've kind of Frankensteined into a 14-barrel system. So we'll produce 2 batches on that a day. So we're yielding about 28 barrels every day at this point. So from the mash tun, we transfer over to our kettle, where we bring it up to boil and add all of the fun ingredients. Currently, we're adding such things like honey, ginger. We're going to be adding some hot limestone rocks shortly to a brew. Coffee. For one of our brews that we do with one of our coffee partners, we actually add the flower petals from coffee plants from Colombia into it. You can add whatever you want, as well as your hops, of course. And once it's done boiling, we transfer it over to the fermenter and let her hang out until it's nice and ready to serve.
Yeah. And then, so one thing that we haven't dug into much on this podcast yet is then once the beer is ready to go, the whole bottling operation that goes along with a facility like yours. And I was wondering if you could talk about that. So what was the bottling equipment? Was that included with the equipment that you bought originally, or is that something else that you purchased after?
Well, sort of included. When we came into the building, there was a 2-head bottle filler, which would produce a case every 3 to maybe 4 minutes, as well as an old labeler from, I think it's from the 1940s. So we had a lot of work to get that label up and running, and we're still using the labeler. It's a great old one that quite a few breweries will still use, and now it's working nicely for us. Thankfully, Dave, one of my guys, is very mechanically inclined, and he'll make parts for it because, of course, you can't buy any parts anymore from that equipment, and he just keeps that thing running for us. It's great. The filler, though, we knew that with where we were starting out, we wouldn't be able to survive on a case every 2 or 4 minutes. So kind of once again, as the theme of our brewery is, we like to Frankenstein things, and we added more heads to it, increased all the pressures to it, CO2, air, and got it up to produce about a case a minute now. So for us, it works out well. We're producing about 28 barrels a day, and on that line, we can fill 28 barrels of cases a day. So it's just about perfect where we are.
So when you're bottling, how much time and effort does it take? Do you have to have somebody standing there all the time to make sure everything's working well?
Oh, yeah.
Is it really automated? How's that work?
Some systems are automated. Ours is very manual.
Okay.
We will put 24 bottles on to a conveyor just before the filling. Those will run through. They'll get filled. They'll get labeled, and then they'll come off the backside. And we actually still hand pick up each one off of a little conveyor that then we'll put into a case box, send it down a line. One guy hand glues it closed, and then we put them onto a pallet. So we're running about 3 people on our bottling line, and especially during the summer months when it gets a little warm, you can break a pretty nice sweat working down there. Yeah.
So then once the beer is made, could you walk me through what you're doing for distribution in Wisconsin?
Sure. Right now we chose early on to sell our beer through a distributor. There's a great one in Wisconsin, Beechwood Sales and Service, that they're very craft focused. It's where they started just selling craft beer, and they've become great partners. And when we first met them, we kind of really hit on a lot of the same. We were very similar focused in what we believed in about craft beer and where it could go in Wisconsin. So we formed a partnership, and they've been great. We're all throughout Wisconsin now. We've really hit every corner of the state. We get out there ourselves to sell the beer, as well as they do a nice job with their reps getting out there and trying to represent us. And yeah, I think as of last year, we had been in something like 800 different locations throughout Wisconsin.
That's great, man.
Yeah, we were very happy with that, being only a year and a half old, come December.
Yeah, that's one thing we didn't hit on. So just a year and a half come December?
It is amazing. Yeah, our growth is far beyond what I allowed myself to put to paper when we were, drafting those first business models. We did 600 barrels total in 2011. And at the end of 2012, we have been producing the equivalent of about 3,000 barrels a year. So it just kind of, for us, still mind-blowing. We still giggle about it all the time. It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Any talks about expansion yet?
Well, we've already done 2 expansions in this year and a half. We added 6 30-barrel horizontals to help with our carbonating as well as secondary fermentation, and that was our first expansion back in early 2012. And then July of this past year, we added 6 30-barrel fermenters to our brew house. So it took us up to a capacity of about 7,000 barrels. So we have room to grow, which is nice. So we're not afraid right now of kind of looking at new opportunities and expanding our product line. So it's nice. Up until before that, the tanks came in, we only had 3 fermenters. So we were producing 5 different styles of beer on those 3 fermenters, which got to be quite difficult at times. So now we have 8 total, and it really gives us some opportunities to look at new beers, without worry of, making the ones that we already have out in the market, and starting to have some fun with new varieties.
Yeah, talking about product line a little bit, I was wondering if you could walk me through the type of beer that you offer and how you decide on which ones that you want to produce and send out to market. Sure.
Well, our year-round beers, we offer 4 different varieties, and the theme for them, for me, was really solidified after I went to the Great American Beer Fest in Colorado. The day I quit my job in the concrete industry, I hopped on a plane and flew out to GABF as kind of a celebratory, this is my new lifestyle, or my new life industry, and went to one of the sessions, and, they're incredible. You get all these just crazy beers, 1 ounce or 2 ounces at a time. And as much as I was enjoying it, at the end of the day, all I wanted to do was just have a pint of something that I didn't have to think about. It could just be kind of part of the conversation for whatever you're about, and it didn't have to be a focal point if I didn't want it to be a focal point. And I realized that I wanted to be a central part and theme of our year-round brew series. So what we crafted are beers that we're describing as one off of normal. It's not going to be the crazy beers that, have, whether it be spruce tips or moon dust in them. But, and I love those for what they are. I'm not knocking them at all, but, these are just going to be beers that, got to a point of what people were hoping to have seen a beer, but got there a little bit differently. The best example of which I think is our black wheat. I didn't want to do a porter or stout just because there are so many great ones out there, but I knew we needed a dark beer. So I played with a few different styles and realized, we love our wheat beer in Wisconsin. Let's try to blacken it. So using a blackened wheat malt, we blackened a nice wheat beer and created our bad boy. And, it turned out great. It's a little lighter in body than your traditional porter or stout. Still has that roast and kind of chocolate notes to it. But because we don't use blackened barley in it, which is often harsher than a blackened wheat malt, it's just really smooth at the finish, and easy drinking. And it was right what we wanted to do. It's something that could be a side of whatever you're up to. You could just drink it and not think about it. Or if you really want to get geeky, there's enough going on in there that you can have some fun with it.
You're making me thirsty. So when you're brewing, you talked about making sure that the beer comes out the same every time. What are you guys doing at the brewery to make sure that every time that you make one of your bad boy black wheat ales, that they taste the same as the last batch and the batch that's going to come after
Sure.
that?
We have a pretty intense QA/QC lab at our brewery that we put every batch through some pretty stringent testing before we let it go out the door. With my training, I was able to take our lab to a nice degree that I felt comfortable making sure the product was consistent. But when I was finally at the point where I needed to hire a brewer to help me out because we were just producing more than I could do myself, I made sure that we brought someone in with a microbiology background. And that's when Brian joined us. And he took the lab from what I deemed to be nice to something that's just far beyond that. We're testing every batch for bacteria or wild yeast. We're isolating yeast cells and just making sure that they're always going to be consistently producing the same esters and flavor profiles that we want, especially since we use a Belgian strain for half of our beers, which, the yeast is such a pivotal or critical part of that beer. We are constantly forcing conversion on beer so we know ahead of time if it's going in the right direction, and if not, we can start steering it in the proper direction before it gets to the point of us having to worry about what are we going to do with this batch. And just really being diligent on every part of the process and making sure the malt comes in and that it's of good quality through mashing, making sure that we're getting our conversion from starches to sugars, into the boil, making sure we're boiling long enough so we're not producing any off flavors. Giving a long enough diacetyl rest, we're testing for that for every batch. And bringing him on really allowed us to make sure that no stone went unturned when it came to producing it, so that we would never be surprised, and we knew that bad boy would taste like bad boy.
And I think you just covered a great point there. Is your QA/QC, your quality control, doesn't come just at the end. It's not like you're just trying the beer out at the end of the process and saying, "Oh, that doesn't taste right." You're monitoring all along each step to make sure that you don't have that batch that goes bad that you don't feel comfortable sending out.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many things that if you catch them early enough, you can correct it. One of the things with yeast is you're dealing with a living organism. And because of that, it never really wants to do the same thing every time. So you really just, as long as you stay on top of it, you can guide it to where you need it to get. But if you don't realize it until, like you said, it's too late, well, then it's too late.
So you said that, so you guys have experienced a ton of growth over the last year and a half. I'm curious, what's working for you right now to get the word out about Three Sheeps?
For us, it's been a lot of boots on the ground. I don't know that, since I've started, it's a 7-day week job. Whether we're brewing all day, any days we're not brewing, I'm trying to get out there and sample out to different people so that they can, learn who we are, experience our beers. We do a lot of festivals on the weekends. Pretty much every weekend we have a festival somewhere, between Wisconsin and Illinois. And yeah, we've just really tried to push hard to make sure that, we've been able to, get our beer into people's mouths so that they can at least try it and, determine for themselves whether or not they like it. And thankfully, more often than not, when they try it, they do enjoy it and are willing to buy that first pint and hopefully that second pint. I was fortunate enough when I started this company up, a college buddy of mine, James, got wind of it through Facebook that I had started a brewery, and he called me up and came up, and he was living down in Chicago at the time, and started to help around the brewery a bit and really started enjoying it. And he actually came on as a part owner in the brewery, and he spends most of his days on the road selling for us and, working that side of things, our social media, our events, and just making sure that it's a focal point and not just something we do whenever we have some spare time. So I think that's really helped us out a lot. More than that, we've been very fortunate with awards and accolades. I still don't believe some of them when they come in, but it's been very nice. We were named Best New Brewery in Wisconsin by Rate Beer for 2011, which gave us our first kind of credibility. So
that's awesome.
Up until then, every time we wanted to open an account, we had to sample. But because of the Rate Beer, people were willing to start trying us without having the beer presented to them ahead of time. And that really helped our growth quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's great. Starting out with the quality right off the bat and having that prove it, and then getting sales from that, whether instead of going the other way where you've got to prove yourself out first.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So for anybody who's thinking of starting a brewery, Grant, what would be some advice that you could give for them after your experience?
I would say you definitely need the technical experience. It really doesn't matter how great of a home brewer or brewer you are in creating recipes. There's so much more to it. Even getting beyond making sure that the beer is consistent from a quality control standpoint, but many of the classes now are really focusing on the manufacturing side of a brewery, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about. Is, when it comes to making beer, upstairs when we were just kegging before we started bottling, it was relatively simple. We had 5 pumps and a boiler that produced steam, and that's really all the automation in our brew house. You add bottling to the mix, and all of a sudden you're talking about a whole lot more equipment, generally automated equipment with fancy sensors and computers, and that takes a whole nother level of expertise that often a brewer doesn't have coming into it. So anytime you're able to get that real world experience, if you have the chance to go and intern at a brewery, spend a day or two in the brew house, but I would probably spend most of my time watching packaging, because that's when you leave, you're going to think, I wish I would have done that more. How do they do that? How did that machine operate? How many spare parts do they keep? Because of course, no matter how big a spare part inventory you have, you never have the piece that breaks. Yeah, along that way, I think packaging is something that is neglected in our kind of pre-thinking about what we're going to be up to.
So after a couple of years of working in the brewing industry, are you glad you made the change from concrete?
Oh yeah, every day. I am. It's nice. When I walk into our brew house, right in front of our back door, there is one of those kind of cast iron castings that go into the ground that the water flows into. And we used to sell those at our concrete plant, and it's kind of nice because I step over that every day, and it kind of helps me remember this is what I was doing, and now this is what I get to do. At the time when I was in the concrete industry, I had a T-shirt, and it had a little gnome that was at a crossroad. One way pointed to fame, fortune, money, success, and the other way pointed to really cool water slides. And he didn't know which way to go. And for me, all my friends knew that was kind of my internal struggle. You always needed concrete. It could have been something I could have done forever. It would have been safe, secure. But that brewery was just always calling my name, which is why then when I made the leap into starting a brewery, we named our first beer Really Cool Water Slides, our IPA. And it's something we try to never forget. All of our guys that I have here, we're all really passionate about beer. I'm very lucky to have kind of assembled such an awesome team, and we've all wanted to get here for some time. That now that we're here, we try to make sure we never forget it. We hold each other accountable to that. What's your water slide is one of our mantras that we hold pretty dear, and it sure makes working a whole lot more fun, knowing that you're doing what you enjoy. And I can clean all day at the brewery, but you get me home and I have no desire to clean. I think that's kind of a testament how much I love it.
Yeah. Hey man, so for anybody who wants to check out Three Sheeps, where should they go to?
I would recommend you first check out our website. We keep all of our beers updated there. We have a tab finder that lists all the locations that are pouring us in Wisconsin and Illinois. And from there, I would also check out our Facebook page. And we try to be pretty active on there, show any kind of new projects we're up to. Try to keep a pretty good communication going with everyone. So both of those are great. And then, of course, Twitter is where we kind of keep our random stream of consciousness going. Any small things, I think we just, we did if you want to go there, under our Twitter account, we tweeted a brew day and just consistently posted pictures and what we were up to. So if you ever want to see what it's like to brew, you can get a pretty good idea off of our Twitter account.
And I love that you said tap.
Yes.
And locator.
Locator. Yeah, we are sheep themes. Yep. And everyone seems to get into it. Our beer called Euphoria, our ginger chocolate stout is spelled E-W-E-Phoria. And that one actually came from my mother-in-law. She emailed that over to me. She's emailed over a lot of duds, but that was a pretty awesome one. I gotta say.
And you just worked it in there so well too. I barely even noticed it, but I caught it.
Yes. Yeah, it's like I pluralize all animals now. It's always geese, sheeps. It doesn't matter. It's just second nature at this point. And yes, all A's are elongated.
That's awesome, man. Well, what we'll do is we'll put together show notes. So make sure you go in and check out Three Sheeps, and if you can, go and find some of their beer. So, hey, Grant, it's been awesome having you on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, thanks for taking the time. It's always fun to talk beer. I never get.
Yeah. Yes, it is. All right, Grant, you have a good night. Thanks, buddy.
You too.
All right, and I just want to thank Grant again from Three Sheeps. So right now, at the time that this is being posted, they're currently distributing throughout Wisconsin and Illinois. Who knows what the growth that they're seeing? They probably will be going into other states soon, but make sure to check on their website to be able to find their beer and support them. So again, I hope that you got a lot of great knowledge out of this interview. If you get a chance, make sure to go give us a rating in iTunes and tell your friends about the podcast. And since we're going weekly now, I will see you next week on the next MicroBrewr podcast. Thanks again. Make sure to support your local breweries and have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the MicroBrewr podcast with Joe Shellerud. We'll see you right here next time at microbrewer.com.